Frank Borman goes on to say,
"The ground crews couldn't see inside of the spacecraft, but a small television camera trained on AS-204's hatch window caught the drama in sickening detail. A fleeting image of legs and feet moving, followed by an obliterating flash of orange flame."
It seems that these videos indicate that Barron was right, or at least partly right, that the fire had started much earlier than we were told. If we look back to the aforementioned New York Times article, the fire lasted only 4 minutes before crews inside the gantry around the spacecraft and its rocket could open the hatch atop the spacecraft. Logically, because it was pure oxygen feeding the flames, the fire would have been suffocated the instant the capsule ruptured, because then there would be no more pure oxygen to feed it. This can only mean that the fire lasted much longer than we were told, which means it began sooner than we were told. Years later, Jim Lovell would peddle the claim that the astronauts died of smoke inhalation, not fire, and told readers of his Apollo 13 book by far the biggest lie in his entire life. Not knowing if the crew was dead or alive, and not having the time to find out gingerly, he grabbed the boot and pulled hard. The still hot mass of moulded rubber and cloth came off in his hands, revealing White's foot. Birch then patted his hands further up and felt ankle, shin, and knee. The uniform was partly burned away, but the skin underneath was unmolested. Birch tugged the skin this way and that to see if it would slip off from the flesh, a consequence of traumatic burns that, he knew, could cause the victim to shed his outer dermis like a tropical gecko. This skin, however, was intact. Indeed, the entire body appeared intact. The fire had been exceedingly hot, but it had also been exceedingly fast. It was fumes that claimed this man, not flames. No doubt, liar Lovell probably had his fingers crossed when he wrote that. Undoubtedly, these cameras would have recorded the astronauts trying to get out for 5 minutes, and could have aided the successful rescue of the crew. It gets even more disturbing. According to Peter Bond, one of these cameras wasn't a closed-circuit TV camera, but in fact was operated by a cameraman, who apparently did not realise that he was recording a fire and had to adjust the brightness before he saw otherwise.
Outside the craft, a camera located in the White Room showed the rapid spread of the fiery glow. The cameraman did not realize first that he was looking at a fire as he reached to adjust for the brightness.
Given that this mystery cameraman would have seen the fire earlier than anyone else outside the capsule, a fire that we know lasted for at least 4 minutes, why did he not send for help and instead stood to watch the astronauts burn?
There's no fire in the cockpit! There's a bad fire!
And as we are told on Wikipedia,
some witnesses say they saw Ed White on the television monitors, reaching for the hatch release handle as the flames in the cabin spread from left to right and licked the window.
by far the most revealing eyewitness testimony comes from Gary Probst, an RCA employee. According to NASA's own website,
on the first floor of the launch complex, Gary W. Probst, an RCA employee, watched a television monitor that had its transmitting camera trained on the window of the command module. Probst's television picture showed a bright glow inside the spacecraft, followed by flames flaring around the window. For about 3 minutes, he recalled the flames increased steadily. Before the room housing the spacecraft filled with smoke, Probst watched in horror as silver-clad arms behind the window fumbled for the hatch. "Blow the hatch! Why don't they blow the hatch?" he cried. He did not know until later that the hatch could not be opened explosively. Elsewhere, Slayton and Rooser watched the television monitor aghast as smoke and fire billowed up. Rooser tried to break the communications barrier with the spacecraft, and Slayton shouted furiously for the two physicians in the blockhouse to hurry up to the pad.
So, by NASA's admission, Deke Slayton, the head of astronaut selection, Stuart Rosser, who would later fly on Apollo 14, and Gary Probst all saw the Apollo 1 capsule burn. Rocco Petrone, the director of launch operations, also claims to have seen the fire on the TV monitors.
I was looking at a TV on my launch director's console. I saw a flash, and the spacecraft really burst into flames.
It seems other insiders confirm what Probst saw. As Buzz Aldrin goes on to write in his book,
an RCA communications company technician, Gary Probst, was watching a television monitor trained on the one window of the command module not covered by the boost protective cover. He saw a bright flare inside the cabin and tongues of flames slashing around the window. The flames grew brighter and dense smoke billowed. He then saw the silver arms of Ed White's spacesuit grappling with the awkward hatch system. "Blow the hatch," Probst yelled. "Why don't they blow the hatch?"
Again, Thomas Ronald Barron testified the astronauts smelled either fire or smoke at around 6:20 p.m. and tried for 5 minutes to get out. It seems that Gary Probst confirms this. On January 31, 1967, he told the review board,
About 15 seconds after the cry of fire, I saw more arms in addition to White's in front of the porthole seemingly coming from the left. Looking further back into the spacecraft, I could see the legs of the center astronaut moving about. The movement inside the spacecraft lasted about 2 minutes before the flames began to block the view. During the entire time that I watched the astronauts moving, their spacesuits were silver in color with no signs of being burned or charred. I know that my times are very near accurate, because I remember saying to the others that had gathered in the area of the monitor, "Blow the hatch! Why don't they blow the hatch?" One person that was near said the spacesuits would protect them from the heat until they could get out. A short conversation then took place concerning how long and how much the suits could protect them from the fire. Also, comment was made on why no one had entered the White Room as yet. During the time of this conversation, the White Room was still clear, and the astronauts' motion still visible.
Ironically, on NASA's website, they indeed confirm that Probst claimed to see what he said he saw. Of course, they have tried to muddy the waters.
Witnesses differed as to how fast everything happened. Gary W. Probst, an RCA technician at the communication control racks in Area D on the first floor at Launch Complex 34, testified 4 days later that 3 minutes elapsed between the first shout of fire and the filling of the White Room with smoke. Other observers had gathered around his monitor and discussed why the astronauts did not blow the hatch and why no one entered the White Room. One of these men, A.R. Caswell, testified on 2nd of February, 2 days after Probst. In answer to a question about the time between the first sign of fire and activity outside the spacecraft in the White Room, he said, "It appeared to be quite a long period of time, perhaps 3 or 4 minutes.
But despite what NASA says, Gary Probst stood by what he told the review board. A year later, Probst told the newspaper Today,
I think NASA convinced themselves of what happened in the spacecraft, but they didn't convince me. It was about 3 minutes after the fire started that the White Room began to fill with smoke. Prior to that time, the air was clear. I saw the astronauts moving inside for at least 2 minutes before the flames began to block the view.
if NASA wanted to set aside the issue once and for all they would have to do is release those tapes. After all, on the evening of the fire, Paul P. Henny confirmed that NASA had videotape of the fire. So where is this video footage which undoubtedly shows Edward White's final struggle?